Welcome to everybody. I am Stefania Romenti. I'm president of EUPRERA Association. EUPRERA is an association very focused on education and research in the field of PR, public relations and communication. EUPRERA organizes a lot of initiatives, and I wanted to invite you to visit the website because a lot of initiatives are described and promoted in this website. Every year, probably you know that we organize an annual congress, which is a very, very interesting moment to share thoughts, researches, and our studies together with members and non-members of EUPRERA. And in the website, you can find a lot of information about the next annual congress, which will be held by Bucharest University next year in September. Today we are here for a webinar because we organize a lot of webinars about specific topics. Before leaving the floor to the moderator of this webinar, I wanted to also remind you that we have organized another webinar for next Friday, which is about the European Communication Monitor, which is the largest survey in Europe which analyzes the state of the art of the communication management. So we invite you also next Friday for attending this webinar. And today the webinar is about a very interesting and important topic, which is communication in uncertain times. And I want to leave the floor to the moderator of this webinar, who will then introduce the other participants, Professor Valentini. So thank you to everybody to be here, and I leave the floor to Professor Valentini. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefania, and welcome everybody to this webinar. I'm Chiara Valentini, Professor of Corporate Communication at University of Jyväskylä in Finland, and I've been asked to chair and moderate this webinar, where we are going to discuss particular research result outcoming from last year EUPRERA Congress, which focused on crisis issues and risks. We have invited 4 speakers that are also contributing to our EUPRERA volumes. As you know, EUPRERA also tried to promote the research of the EUPRERA members and of quality work. And we are actually working, it's almost ready for the press. A volume, I think, is number 7, published by Emerald, and series Advances in Public Relation Communication Management, where there are 12 excellent chapters dealing with risk issues and crises from very many different perspectives, and with very well-known international scholars, renowned scholars. And I'm very happy to say that this volume is really also represent the broad spectrum of views, theories, and also even contests in areas that normally are not very much focusing in regular journals. So I'm very happy about the outcomes of the volume. With this, I think I would like to move introducing the speakers and leave the floor for them to present their ideas, their key findings. We will have follow-up QA at the very end of this webinar. You can use the chat function in the video streaming under the live YouTube video. You can post your question. Those will come to us, and we will address at the very end. And I'm pretty sure the speakers are very interesting to hear also your reflections and additional insight that you might have on those topics. With this, I would like to move on. So we have Merja Koskela, University of Vaasa, Finland, with us here, and she will present a co-authored chapter with Helena Kantanen called Mapping the Challenges of COVID-19 from the Point of View Organizational Communication. Then we have Sabine Einwiller from the University of Vienna, Austria, and also co-authored chapter with Christina Kohn, What's Happening at Your Company, Employees' Reaction to Inquiries of Outsider in the Event of Negative Media Coverage. Then we have Ben Firelb, sorry, I'm not sure if I pronounced correctly your surname. Maybe you'll say your surname after, maybe. Johannes Gutenberg University in Germany, and also co-author chapter with Nora Denner and Stephanie Holzer, Efforts of CEO Social Distance and Communication Strategy on Stakeholder Perception and Judgment Processes in Corporate Crisis. And then we have Petra Kuldekova, Charles University. And here is a list of 6 other co-authors. Maybe you introduce them, so might be easier. And the title is Emerging Communication of Government Organization, Lessons Learned from the Pandemic-Related Communication in Education. So let's start with the first presenter. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chiara, and thank you for inviting us, Helena and me, to this presentation. So, dear listeners, in the face of any crisis, the ability to respond during the initial moments can ultimately shape the journey through uncertainty. This applies to organizational practice, but it also has relevance for academic research and the research community. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, communication and PR researchers reacted quickly and contributed by studying communication challenges brought about by the crisis. Initially, they often found their data close by, in their own homes, even, and in their work environments. In our contribution to the EUPRERA publication titled Mapping the Challenges of COVID-19 from the Point of View of Organizational Communication, Helena Kantanen and I set out to explore how research in organizational communication, strategic communication, and public relations first responded to the challenges of the health emergency caused by COVID-19. In order to understand the thoughts and ideas that the health emergency brought along, we introduced the concept of organizational pandemic communication. It refers to all types of organizational and strategic communication through which organizations answered to the requirements of the new situation and thereby kept themselves functioning. The aim of our study was to explore the challenges of health emergency communication and compile the results of the early studies to a model describing the communication challenges and solutions which were considered most relevant at the early stages of the pandemic. Many studies have explored risk and crisis communication, as we know, including past pandemic. However, the scope of the COVID-19 pandemic as a global crisis was unforeseen. Our study contributes to the body of knowledge of pandemic communication by analyzing the initial responses of the PR and communication community to this extreme situation. In line with these ideas, we carried out a qualitative literature review based on 67 academic research articles from 2020 to 2022. The results of our analysis highlighted 5 central topics, that is, information and sense-making, emotional support from leadership, informal communication, empathy and listening, and trust, identity, and resilience. In terms of information and sense-making, the research results emphasize the importance of fluent information flow, adequate information, clever information distribution, and transparency. Leaders faced the task of assisting employees in their sense-making of the situation. This succeeded best when information matched what the employees needed and expected. Emotional support was in high demand, including encouragement, appreciation, respect, and recognition from leaders and co-workers. Emotional support was shown to foster stronger organizational identification and reduce turnover in tension. Charismatic leadership and motivational language seem to enhance employees' commitment to change. In addition, managers and leaders showing humanity helped alleviate uncertainty. Based on our analysis, the role of informal communication and encounters was emphasized as a means of surviving the challenges. Importantly, informal communication supported the sense of being well informed. It also facilitated a deeper comprehension and appreciation of managerial decisions. This in turn tended to coincide with increased job satisfaction, reduced emotional exhaustion, and the reinforcement of a shared organizational identity. Empathy and listening were shown to be at the core of organizations overcoming challenges and crises. The benefits of leadership listening to employees included better understanding of the employees' needs, concerns, and worries. Listening was also found to be a way to relieve loneliness caused by remote work. However, remote work did not always make listening very easy. Also, lack of time or lack of trust were seen as factors making listening to employees difficult, especially if the organizational culture did not support listening to begin with. Last but not least, trust emerged as a central element of organizational life during the pandemic. The pandemic has both challenged trust and, in the best cases, increased it. When leaders supported employees in their sense-making effort, showed empathy, and provided clear guidance, it made employees trust the leaders and the organizations more. According to our data, the exceptional circumstances posed a challenge to employees' professional identity. It was shown that successful organizational pandemic communication reduced identity threats and increased the meaningfulness of work for some employees. However, also identity threats were experienced during the crisis, especially by those employees who did not feel that their work was essential during the crisis. In any case, organizational and individual resilience played an important role in the pandemic situation. Cognitive flexibility helped the employees to cope and also protected them from social distancing fatigue. In summary, three rather concrete main questions to be answered emerged from our data. What organizational pandemic should be like? Who should do it? And what can be achieved by it? These questions were covered in our data. Finally, in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have learned that we live in increasingly uncertain times. As the turbulence with known challenges such as climate change, the rise of authoritarian regimes leading to wars and polarization of societies continues, we also need to prepare for the so-called unknown unknowns. In times such as this, the PR and communication research community needs to stay alert and take care of building trust in workplaces and in the society at large, in normal circumstances before the next crisis hits. The future will depend on our ability to address today's challenges and social changes. In this task, the PR and communication research community has work to do to pave the path to a brighter future. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. It was a very nice intro with a lot of very interesting insight about your study, which actually works very well also for the next presentation, also focused with employees. So I'll give right away the floor to Sabine to give us even more insight about what's happening from the perspective of the employees.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chiara. I'm happy to introduce our chapter with the title, What's Happening at Your Company? ? Employee reactions to inquiries from outsiders in the event of negative media coverage. This chapter addresses how employees are affected and respond when their employer receives negative media coverage. And this can be during a crisis, but also in critical situations that are not yet a full-fledged crisis. So what's the special role of employees in critical situations? They are emotionally and cognitively closer to the organization than most other stakeholders. So when a critical situation or even a full-fledged crisis happens in their organization, they are often directly affected by it, and because it may stabilize their workplace and even possibly their own life. So when the media report negatively about their organization, employees are not only affected, but they are also often a source of information for outsiders who want to find out more about this situation. Because of their credibility, employees can support communication managers to preserve or restore the organization's reputation. But whether or not employees react in a way that helps and supports the organization in such a case of negative media coverage depends on their first willingness to do so, and second, their ability to do so. So based on social identity and organizational identification theories, we argue that employees' willingness is influenced by how attached they feel to the organization, that is, how strongly they identify with it. And furthermore, internal corporate communication plays an important role in preparing the employees to respond to critical inquiries by external stakeholders. And particularly in situations when the organization is publicly criticized, internal communication needs to communicate, of course, well and prepare employees to be able to actively and assertively defend their organization when questions are addressed at them from outsiders. So we conducted a survey to explore the role of organizational identification and internal corporate communication in the event of negative media coverage for employees' reactions to inquiries by outsiders. According to the impression management framework, these reactions can be either defensive or assertive. So defensive strategies are rather passive and include apologizing, evading questions from outsiders, and also feeling embarrassed. Assertive strategy, on the other hand, are more active. They mean to actively defend the organization, explain the situation, and convey the organization's official version of the event in order to bolster the organization's reputation. So for an organization, obviously, assertive impression management performed by employees can be of great assistance, but the defensive strategies are, well, less helpful or may even undermine the official communication efforts by the company. Our survey participants we recruited from a European online panel, and they were employed in different kinds of organizations, profit and non-for-profit, and they did or did not hold a management position. And we also had a filter question asking them whether their employer had been subject to negative media coverage, and in total we had 287 people who, well, said yes to this question. We measured then participants' organizational identification, and then they were asked about the specific situation in which the negative media coverage had occurred, the topic, how they had first learned about it, and how they perceived their employer's official internal communication during this critical situation. So whether it was open or closed, balanced or one-sided, sincere, insincere, quick and slow, and so on. Then respondents were also asked whether they were approached by people outside the organization, asking them about what was going on in their organization. And interestingly, 93% of our respondents said that outsiders asked them about the situation. And these participants then were asked by us how they responded to the questions and whether these responses were assertive or defensive in nature. So what were the results? Interestingly, about half of the participants had first learned about the specific critical situation through mass media. 15% found out about it from colleagues and 7% from personal experience. Only 17% of the respondents received the first information about the critical situation through official internal communication from the organization itself. Then during the critical situation, conversations with colleagues were said to be the most important internal source of information. This was followed by team meetings and the intranet and town hall meetings. To test our research questions and hypotheses concerning the influence of organizational identification and internal communication on employees' assertive and defensive reactions, we conducted structural equation modeling with our data. And the results show that organizational identification has a significant influence on actually both defensive and assertive reactions, but the relation between identification and assertive reactions is stronger than between identification and defensive reactions. Thus, the stronger the identification, the more assertively, meaning the more actively the person defended their employer. So what about the influence of internal communication? We found that the worse the internal communication was perceived, the more the person engaged in defensive impression management, meaning he or she felt embarrassed, apologized, or evaded questions about the negative coverage. But the more positive the evaluation of the internal communication, the more often employees actually showed assertive reactions, which are the active form of responding. So against the background of this finding that internal communication can make a difference, it is actually quite sobering to find that half of the participants in our survey found out about their organization's critical situation through the media and only 17% through internal communication. So this shows that, well, the common advice that employees shouldn't learn bad news from the media is often neglected. And well, it's not surprising that conversations with colleagues were most important and not the official company sources to actually learn about the situation. Then interestingly, also our data revealed that managers serve their ambassador role better as they exhibit more assertive and less defensive impression management behavior than employees without a management role. And well, this appears to be driven by managers' stronger identification with the organization. These findings suggest, well, a special role of managers also as ambassadors during such a critical situation. And this can certainly also be leveraged by internal communication. Overall, our findings not only show the important role of employees' identification with the organization, but also the important role of internal communication, and that internal communication can clearly help to make employees ambassadors for their organizations in critical situations and to make them more assertively defend their organization. Thank you very much for listening. This was it about our chapter.
Thank you, Sabine. This is a very, very interesting and very valuable insight about role internal communication and things like, in crisis, we tend to have often an outside look and what's happening, and rarely, or let's say we consider internal side often too late. Maybe this is also proof of what might be the outcomes when we are not taking care of our own personal first. Now we move to another topic, but still related, because from employees we move to leaders, and we are going to focus now on some effort of CEO activity with Benno presentation. So I'll give you the floor, Benno, for presenting your insight on the role of leaders and CEO.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to present our chapter of this book. And the main idea behind our research project was to take a look on the role of CEO communication in times of crisis, because often we assume that letting the CEO handle crisis communication or letting the CEO step up in a crisis will have positive effects on public perceptions. One reason might be that we think that if a person that leads the organization steps up, the organization is handling the crisis with high priority, for example. However, CEOs differ from each other. So they are all different human beings. They have all their specific own characteristics. And our main argument is that these characteristics are important for the effects of CEO communication in times of organizational crisis. One important factor we want to address here is perceived social distance. So the concept of perceived social distance can be understood as the feeling of how close or socially far away from us we perceive another person. So close social distance would mean we perceive a CEO as a everyday, like you and me person, and a distance view would mean that we see this person as somehow detached from our daily life, maybe like a professional business person. And we argue that a close social distance, which means a perceived high similarity between stakeholders and the CEO, will result in positive effects on public image perceptions for both the organization and the CEO. And one way to achieve this feeling of close perceived close perceived social distance is to include private information in external CEO communication before a crisis happens, because this should make the CEO appear, make him or her appear more approachable before any crisis situation has happened. And we use two concepts to explain why positive effects of perceived social distance may occur. The first one is empathy. We can define empathy as the ability to relate to another person's situation, feelings, or emotions. And our idea here is that close social distance will increase empathy perceptions of public stakeholders, and high levels of empathy with the CEO will result in a more positive attitude towards the CEO and as well towards the company. The other explanation or mechanism is motivated reasoning. So when we perceive new information, every individual strives to fit this new information into existing sets of information to avoid cognitive dissonance. And our idea here is that if a person perceives a CEO as socially close, information on the crisis, so negative new information, might trigger this mechanism of cognitive dissonance or motivated reasoning. If I feel socially close to the CEO, I will may tend to judge on the crisis in a more forgivable way, because after all, the CEO is one of us. It's like an everyday person. I feel close to this person, and there was no harm intended in the actions the organization led to the crisis. We also included in our research program how different crisis response strategies could influence these mechanisms. For example, because an apology of the organization or an apology transported by the CEO might further boost feelings of empathy, and that should also reduce negative image perceptions or any negative consequences of the crisis. We tested these ideas within an experimental design. Participants saw a fictitious interview with the CEO of a likewise fictitious company. And this interview either included private information on the CEO, especially on how he is a family man, how he takes his time to watch his kids' sports games in his free time, so he's a family person. And the other experimental condition did not contain any information on the private life of the CEO. Then in the second part of the stimulus, our participants saw information on a cybersecurity crisis at the company in a short journalistic bit. And here the CEO either dismissed all responsibility, which would be the deny strategy, or he apologized for the incident, which would refer to a rebuild strategy. And the crisis setting was a high responsibility crisis because the company ignored previous information on their cybersecurity situation. So it was more or less preventable. In our experiment, we measured empathy, motivated reasoning, and the image of the organization and the image of the CEO. And our results showed that perceived close social distance indeed increases empathy, as we expected. And empathy had indeed positive effects on all image perceptions for the organizational image as well as for the image of the CEO. And this occurred regardless of the chosen crisis statement. So it didn't matter if the CEO apologized or if he dismissed all responsibility for the crisis. There was still a positive effect mediated via empathy on both image perceptions for the organizations and how the participants perceived the CEO. However, for the concept of motivated reasoning, these effects only occurred in case of a deny strategy. We don't know why this was the case. We assume that the positive effects from the apology somehow outweighed the effects that could happen via this mechanism of motivated reasoning. So in case of an apology, we had no significant effects from motivated reasoning. In case of a deny strategy, we found these effects. If we sum this up in two take-home messages, I would say message one, especially regarding the last result, is that crisis response strategies still matter. They are not replaceable or outweighed by other crisis management decisions, such as if the CEO should make a statement or not. What you are saying is still important, but, and this might be take-home message two, CEO and private information on the CEO's lives can have an impact on stakeholder perceptions in a crisis, especially if the CEO is stepping up in times of crisis. And therefore, in the end, it's not only about what is said in a crisis and who is saying that, but also how the public has perceived the spokesperson, in this case, the CEO, beforehand. And that's our main take-home message, I would say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benno. Thank you. I think this is also very interesting. If we think about Maria's early presentation, I think you, Maria, mentioned empathy as something very important you found on your review, and how the employees really wanted to have these connections with their leaders, which is essentially what you, Benno, find out, that empathy is really taking away any kind of decisions on the type of messaging out there. So whether they apologize or they deny, if the people perceive the CEO is caring, is a human person, as a human side, and the human side emerge, that kind of filter out no matter the prospect, which is, I think, very, very interesting outtakes. But let's now move to have some other insight of leaders. And now we move actually to more on the public sector side to see how some leaders have addressed the COVID pandemic. So I leave the floor to Petra to present chapter's main findings. Petra, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I am glad I can introduce you the chapter Emergency Communication of Government Organizations. The next co-authors were Denisa Hejlová, Tereza Ješková, Tereza Klabíková-Rábiová, Sonia Schneiderová, and Marcela Konrádová. So that's it. This chapter is part of our research project entitled Research on the Communication of Czech Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport to different stakeholder groups, which took place between 2019 and 2021 here in the Czech Republic. It gave us the opportunity to observe how different stakeholder groups evaluate the ministry's communication in time of crisis, more especially in times of COVID pandemic. The new challenges that this situation has brought have had a major impact on all system of education. The chapter presents empirical evidence of government communication challenges in time of crisis in, let's say, post-communist country, and thus addresses the gap in government communication knowledge concerning the role of democracy and stakeholder participation in transforming societies. It's good to say that in the Czech Republic, government communication has not yet fully transitioned from the communist propaganda model to fully integrated communication system, such as in Great Britain or Sweden or many other countries. We know that the accessibility and comprehensiveness of government information play an important role in how citizens or stakeholder groups take decisions and behave. In critical times, governments are required to meaningful crisis communication strategies to address the needs of different stakeholders. So it was very important for our research and for this chapter, of course. The current practice of government communication in the Czech Republic lies in the communication departments of government institutions, such as ministries, which usually employ a small number of people, let's say 8 or 10 persons, including the spokesperson. And the role of this department is often perceived merely as a public relation office and communication service for the minister or top officials. No concept of government communication was employed by the Czech government at the time of the research project, despite an attempt to establish a strategic communication department within the government's office. This same applies to government crisis communication. As I said, it was a research, it was a big project, so a few words about the methodology. We have identified school principals as one of the most important stakeholders and also opinion leader in the Czech Republic regarding communication about education. School principals directly communicate with the Ministry of Education and other government organizations, but also with local governments or private organizations, and with teacher, parents, students, and others. School directors also communicate with journalists and the media, as they represent the convey of official statements and information about the school. We have stated two main research questions. The first one was how do school principals perceive and evaluate communication from the Ministry of Education to them. And the second one, what were the key communication failures and problems in government crisis communication with school directors? The project included a large-scale study identifying and mapping the government's key stakeholders group and their communication channels. It also included a several public opinion survey of various stakeholder groups, such as school principals, teachers, and the public. And complete study is published on the website of the Ministry of Education. So you can read it, but it's only in the Czech, unfortunately. Mixed research method approach was used to study government communication, and it included document analysis of government communication, then a survey among school directors. We had 246 respondents, and in-depth qualitative interviews with preschool, primary, secondary, and high school directors in several regions of the Czech Republic. We have 10 respondents. Yeah, we have got important and interesting findings. For example, results from the qualitative in-depth interviews show that school principals are the key mediators of the information flow between the government communication represented by the Ministry of Education and other stakeholder groups. The quantitative survey investigated how principals perceived and evaluate government communication from the Ministry of Education, which is addressed directly to them. And the structure of the questionnaire is detailedly described in the chapter. Plus, you can find here the results for individual topic headings. But I can say that we concluded it the most directors see the form of communication coming from the government institution as unprofessional, not timely, difficult to comprehend, and unclear. On the result-based, we suggest some practical implication to prevent failures in future crises. For example, government officials should use fast means of communication which target the audience, reliable on the time, not just a e-government emailing, which is delayed due to slow data processing. Then the Ministry of Education lacks a real emergency system, such as communication via mobile phone and short messaging service. It should be developed. There is also a need for feedback, starting with the personnel and phone directory on the website, a clear set of responsibilities, and many others. Finally, we can say that the Ministry of Education, as well as other Czech government organizations, have historically received a low trust from citizens and key stakeholders. During the pandemic, these earlier negative opinions have heavily influenced how stakeholders evaluated these institutions in general, and in particular the Ministry of Education performance in crisis communication. So that is everything about our chapter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Petra. Thank you. Again, here I see quite an interesting connection with what we have been discussing with the previous presentation. So we've seen that there is an issue with clear information that was also outlined from the first presentation, and the sense-giving ideas of what they should do, this principal in school, was not there, so a problem there. We've seen also something that now recall me a bit what Sabine was mentioning about, that the employees in those organizations she surveyed, some of them said that they get the news from the media rather than internal. And when Petra and your team, you analyze how some of these principals said, well, sometimes there is a news outside saying that the school should do this and that during the COVID, and they didn't even know what they were supposed to do. It is exactly what we are talking, that sometimes we are much outwards focus and not consider that first we need to have good places of communication, understanding internally before be able to address external issues. So I see a lot of interesting insight in this presentation, is these chapters. And we now will start a little bit of conversation. And of course, if you have questions, comments or curiosity, anything you'd like to ask, you can type in the chat of this video under this, and we can take it to our speakers. And maybe I'll start with a question, as we are seeing a lot of connection with the concept of stakeholder. A question I would like to ask to all the four of you, and then in terms of like you to say a few words of from your point of view. So when we think about crisis, of course, there are different kind of crises, different nature, operational, reputational, natural, some connected with disaster, pandemic like the one you have been studying. And we know they pose a lot of constraint to organization and stakeholders. So I'm wondering, should we as a researcher start rethinking what is the role of stakeholder in the crisis management? And if we should rethink the role of stakeholder, what should it be this new role or revised role? Who would like to start with some insight? Maria, yes.
Thank you. It's a very interesting question, starting with who are the key stakeholders, recognizing who they are and who are the most critical ones. But what I would like to point out in today's hybrid media system, that anybody can become a crisis communicator. So this is something that we need to address. Like I think Sabine was into this as well. So the employee might be important, like or somebody else might be important, but recognizing who the main stakeholders are and keeping them close and positive, that would be perhaps the point of view to remember.
Thank you, Maria.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I can just add to that. So you picked up that point that well, everybody can speak, and well, as we found in our research, the employees, they are addressed by, I mean, 93% said, and it wasn't even a full-fledged crisis in some cases, yes, but in other cases it was just negative media coverage. But people are interested, and then they ask. I mean, everybody communicates, or people ask employees. They may post on social media and ask questions. So yes, you're totally right. I mean, the stakeholders are active communicators, so they're not just passive recipients of crisis communication. So they participate actively in this crisis communication, and this is why. Well, first of all, listening is important, but then obviously also, I mean, now referring to our study, preparing the employees to speak for their organization, to be prepared for that and actively defend the organization, and possibly say what is the position of the organization in this crisis situation.
Yes, Benno, please.
Thanks. So I don't think we need to rethink the role of stakeholders, because it's all there in our literature and previous research. So Sabine told me about stakeholders 10 years ago in a course I visited. So it's nothing new, and it's really a core concept of crisis communication, I think. Almost all theories or models we have, they deal with stakeholder perceptions. They see stakeholders as a core concept in crisis communication, and some of them even think that stakeholders are constituting crisis. So only if there's a certain degree of awareness of a crisis, the crisis actually occurs. So maybe we don't need to rethink, but focus more on what we already have and remind ourselves we know a lot of stakeholder relations, and maybe that's the connection to our study. So actively think of stakeholders not only as recipients, but also as active voices that might help us in times of crisis. And you mentioned different types of crisis, and I think that deserves a closer look, because organizational crises that stem from internal troubles such as product failures, they follow a totally different logic than pandemics, of course. In case of a pandemic, we're all in the same boat, more or less, and there's uncertainty all over the place in a way. So everybody is looking for information and clarity, and that's hardly comparable to other crises. So how stakeholders can and need to be addressed in a crisis highly depends on the kind of crisis, I think.
Thank you, Benno. Petra, yes.
Thank you. I'm not sure if is it needed to rethink the role of stakeholders as well. But from my view, regarding to the government communication, government institution, the relationship between the organization and stakeholders in non-crisis periods, it's also very important. If a long-term and solid cooperation is established, so it's more than appropriate to involve them in crisis management. I think, for example, directors of schools, they could be a good partner for discussion and collecting suggestion. Their involvement can facilitate crisis communication and deliver the necessary message to different stakeholder groups, for example.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, the intermediary roles of certain stakeholders that might be able to reach other stakeholder group is obviously central in some of these more broader or more complex kind of crisis. And now that we talk about these issues with the stakeholders and some more complex crises, some also that are currently occurring and due to the current situation society and I mean conflicts emerge of different forms of different kind. There is polarizations and these issues are taking very, very, very different kind of debates and sometimes even create contentions and situation of highly conflict. So when we are in situations where the crisis very polarized, the crisis issue is very polarized, how can manager address these different views? Because there's not really one way to go about in that, and how the crisis should be handled from your point of view. Sabine, yes, and then
maybe I can start. Well, this is in crisis. Of course, there's polarized views, but there's polarized views on many issues. I mean, nowadays, I mean, this is one thing we observe in many countries and many societies, that people have like extreme views. And in my opinion, the organizations, they need to find out. I mean, first of all, of course, they need to do listening and find out about these positions, but they have to clearly define their position. So define their own position and take a stance and clearly know what's their position. I don't think, as a communications manager, I mean, you cannot address all these different extreme viewpoints, but clearly know, okay, what is the organization's position on a specific issue, or depending on what the crisis is, but like on a crisis situation, and then argue, hopefully convincingly, with good arguments, why the organization is taking this position, and trying to address maybe other viewpoints, but clearly be firm in the own position. So I think this is important.
Thank you, Sabine. Benno, you want to say something? You raise your hand.
Yes, thank you. So I think it connects really well to what Sabine just said, because my recommendation would be to relax in a way, because there are, of course, debates on issues that are critical, that are polarized in a way, and there will always be groups that disagree with the position or statement an organization takes. And of course, these debates may get ugly, and communication or crisis managers will be alerted if that happens. But harsh debates, to my impression, occur mainly online or in social media. And it's most likely not the majority of people that harshly fights your organization or disagrees with it. So if you take a stance, you have to live with someone not agreeing with you. It's part of the game, and I don't think it's bad. It may actually be good for you. However, when I thought about this question, one danger I see is if you oppose your key audience in a way, because if we remember the case of the beer brand Bud Light in the US, they actually got in kind of financial trouble in a way, because they stopped selling so much beer as they did before, because they opposed the American right-wing culture in a way. And for me, that was a really interesting and also extreme case, because it was one of the few situations when boycott actually had consequences, negative consequences for the company. I think in most cases, it's rather short-term agitation online, and organizations won't get or will get out of this crisis without any harm. Maybe it might also help you to prosecute your brand building process in a way.
And that's actually a very interesting case, because I think it anchors also not only the choices of the company itself or the multinational companies, but also the fact that it goes against some social norms and values that are ascribed in large group of society, which is probably the reason why the largest impact also of the consequences. It was not just they didn't place the specific group of consumer, but took really a stance on something that is challenging in social terms and social norms terms. Thank you, Bena. Maria and Peter, would you like to add something? Petra, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Benno and Sabine, for your opinions. I think it's very interesting, and I agree with you. But maybe I summarize our experience or findings from our research. Because yes, we met polarized society. We think, or I think, the role of the crisis manager is really crucial, as it can either bring a company or institution or society together, or on the contrary, divide it even more. So if we accept the premise that the society is polarized, the crisis manager should be part of the communication team even in non-crisis periods, and try to unite a society by small subtle steps, or at least prepare the most positive perception of the organization before the crisis. And that is something what we need in our government institution very much.
Yeah, that's actually very, very, very a good point, that perhaps these kind of challenges face it in particular organization, public sector organization, who are they anyway to serve the collective, and so the all different views, they have to be quite careful, different than company where they can choose, who they want really to address the most with their values and their activities. Mary, did you want to add something to this conversation?
Basically, Chiara, you said what I was going to say.
Okay.
That it of course depends on the organization. That when it's a political issue, you have to discuss and ventilate all kinds of points of view. I would remind you of a concept that Hochschild introduced in 2018, and that's climbing over the empathy wall. So meaning that in some cases it is important to be able to get into the other person's shoes, so to say, and realize where those points of view come from. Because those situations are very complex. So understanding, even though not accepting, might be an important thing, so that you acknowledge that there are these views, even though some path must be chosen in the middle. So
Thank you, Maria. This is also a very nice statement to make as we are getting close to end this webinar. Reminded that everything starts from the listening for, understanding the standpoints of the who is affected in the critical situation, and obviously also look at, as we have heard, the inside perspectives, and reconsidering different kind of elements beside maybe the more rational ideas of messaging, when we know that empathy, trust, and clear information and showing the human side matters, particularly when the crisis is like a COVID, when it's a health issue, when something that is really broad, maybe narrow, like could be a specific organizational crisis. We need to have that point of view. With this, I think we are almost at the end of the hour webinar. I would like to thank all the panelists for joining and sharing their insight chapter, and remind our audience about the upcoming volume, volume 7, and is focusing on crisis. We have 12 chapters, including the 4 you're hearing here, with a very different kind of insights about risk, issues, and crisis. So stay tuned. More information will be published in the EUPRERA website when the book is available for purchase. Thank you so much for everybody to join us today, and have a nice weekend.